All right. Hello, everybody. We are now live for the CarbonHub deep dive. So we do have this set up webinar style. The chat is open, so we can see everyone there. Towards the end of the presentation, we can, I believe, invite people on as with call features. So if you have a little bit more of a in-depth question and you need to explain some context, you'll be able to be promoted as a speaker and share those questions. Real quick, I think I've met many of you at Catalyst, but I know some new team members are joining that were not at the event. So just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Daniela. I am customer marketing manager at EnergyCAP. So I wanted to thank you all for hopping on this platform. I know it's new and you probably had to register and you got some different invitations. So I appreciate you guys making the effort to get here. We are just launching Eco Champions. So it's a bumpy ride at first, but if you guys have any feedback, you have any concerns, like please reach out to me. I'm happy to help you work through them. And we're trying to improve the process as we go. So on that note, I will go ahead and kick it off to the dudes in the room to walk through this awesome new platform that we have for you guys. And please post your questions. Dave will probably have a little bit more insight around this, but we'll take as many questions as we can throughout, but we're going to hold off and we'll do Q&A at the end. We have lots of time scheduled.
Lalit, control yourself. I'll take it from there, Danielle. But yes, welcome everyone. Glad that you can join us today. We've got a bunch of folks who are on the platform. I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but I can tell you because I can see it. A bunch of folks that are here. We didn't have any special intro slides because we figured most of you got a chance to talk to Lilith and I at Catalyst. But if not, as quick background, my name is Dave Ulmer. I'm the Chief Product and Technology Officer for EnergyCAP. I've been with the company about 10 years and in various roles. And my involvement with CarbonHub is related to my role of thinking about where are we going next with EnergyCAP and what are the services and products that we can provide to our customers to continue to add value, to continue to support you in your roles, to help you tell your stories, to be able to enable you to get the most out of your time that you spend working on energy and accounting and sustainability management. So happy to be with you here today. As Daniela mentioned, we do want this to be a more interactive session. So our intent with this was we know that not everyone had a chance to attend any of the CarbonHub sessions at Catalyst. So we wanted to briefly go through some of the background that we covered, make sure we've got everybody on the same page, but really have more time than we had at Catalyst to show hands-on the functionality that's available with CarbonHub, to show you some real-life examples of how it works, so that hopefully as you're thinking about it and considering whether or not it's the right tool for you, you can get some of your questions answered. And we're hoping that maybe some of you also brought folks in from your teams to see it firsthand as well. So we do have some slides, but we are going to also be getting into CarbonHub and showing you how that works within the platform throughout our time here together as well. Yeah, that's good, Danielle. Yeah, she just wants to make sure you all can see and hear us, so you can use the emojis and opportunities to share that with us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lalit, who's going to start us through our discussion today. Lalit, you want to give an intro and then I'll advance?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Hello, everyone. Again, Lalit Agarwal, VP of Energy Management and Sustainability for EnergyCAP. I met a lot of you when we were in Bloomsburg area 3 weeks ago, and the conversations just continued but never finished. So this is just our attempt to make sure that we want to give you a little extra time. Some of it might be repetitive again, as Dave said, because you attended the sessions, but just bear with us and we will try to get to the, especially the content that was not covered during the sessions that we had at Catalyst. So we'll jump right in. Feel free to keep putting information in the chats and we'll try to answer them. So just at a very high level, the agenda today is just we're going to do a very high level overview of CarbonHub and the sustainability and energy features for ERP system that we have. The carbon greenhouse gas tracking, just really go back to basics and talk about what does that entail? Where can you start if you are facing a requirement either from your own organizations, from a locality, or any other regulatory need that you have to stacking your emissions? We're going to then do a quick demo of Scope 1 and Scope 2 tracking. Some of you are familiar with this because EnergyCAP has had Scope 1, Scope 2 tracking in the past. We take it to a whole new level now, and we'll demonstrate how. And then we'll also then spend a little time talking about the options we have for Scope 3 reporting, and how can organization. And EnergyCAP actually went through an exercise similar to that. So we wanted to track our own Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And the way we went about, we'll share with you, so it becomes a helpful tool for you to start thinking about how you can do it. We'll point you to some guidance that's available in the industry, which is applicable to different industries. So your organization is different than EnergyCAP, so this case study will help you at least start thinking through it. But then if you want to apply it to your own scenario, you can use the guidelines that are available in the industry. And then we'll talk a little bit about the reporting improvements that we have made in our reports framework, especially related to CarbonHub aspects, ending up with some of the ways that we will handle things for you behind the scenes, and then open it up for Q&A. So that's a high-level session agenda for you today. So moving on. So we want to first come back to this energy and sustainability ERP platform. So we've mentioned this many times. You may have heard the term ERP platform. We want to make sure that we are all on the same page as to what ERP stands for. So ERP is Enterprise Resource Planning. It is basically a comprehensive software package that can be used by companies to streamline and coordinate operations and activities across business functions. So that's the definition of an ERP. And then as you think about an energy and sustainability ERP, think back to the times when we in organizations used to have paper-based for accounting and how we use Workday and SAP and other systems. We've come a long way. And the reason for that progression was because the status quo of manual data entry and siloed information really did not scale well as organizations got more complex. The same is true for energy and sustainability data. Today, we stand at the time where we are starting a leap from the manual data entry to having a difficult time maintaining or updating the data, to this automated data capture, to auditable financial grade data, to proactively monitoring and responding in time for anything that you have, improving collaboration between various groups within the organization, making the data more scalable, reportable, and reliable. So that's really what we are trying to draw a parallel to, is how we've come a long way in our accounting and human resources system. That's what energy and sustainability finds itself at. So that's the evolution that we are talking about, getting away from spreadsheets to an ERP system. Dave, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think you did a pretty good job with that. I think, although the concept or the idea of an energy and sustainability ERP may be newer to many of you, my guess is many of you have used some type of an ERP system before. And that's really, if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, I think it fits really well with thinking about how EnergyCAP's products have continued to evolve and how our portfolio of projects are really filling out. So when we talk about that energy and sustainability ERP, what we're really talking about is that single source of truth that you have within your organizations that allows you to confidently answer questions, give you instant access to data at all levels. Because sometimes you need to be into the details, and sometimes you need to have that 20,000-foot view of what's going on. And that's where EnergyCAP's product offerings really try to meet you wherever you are at within your energy and sustainability journey. So we're not going to spend time talking about the EnergyCAP specific functionality today or the WATX specific functionality today, but we wanted to at least start broad and then dive into CarbonHub. So as a reminder, because I know some of these are new terms that we introduced at Catalyst over the last couple of months. So the EnergyCAP product, I would say everybody who's on the line today, either you have it or maybe you're thinking about getting it. It's probably what brought you to Catalyst. So that's really our portfolio level energy and sustainability reporting tool. So that allows you to get detailed insights into your utility bills, your energy use, your utility finances. It allows you to do reporting at the granular level, but also to roll things up at a building or a site or a cost center or a financial budget fund level, a campus, etc. So really wide views and also narrowing in to bill management functions. When we think about Wattix, Wattix adds a level of both analysis and the ability to understand what's going on with your facilities at a much more granular level through our real-time analysis and sustainability analytics. But it also provides you with opportunities for great savings. Because one of the key strong points of Wattix is that not only does it allow you to dive in and do that analysis, but it also can proactively notify you of issues that are going on in the real time, because it can monitor not just sub-meters as an example, but it can also monitor other data points. So you can hook your HVAC systems up and you can be watching and get alerted when things look abnormal. And that's part of the power of Wattix, is this intelligence engine. We call it the Sentinel model, that uses your historic performance and patterns to predict what should be happening in the real time. And when things fall outside of that range, you can be alerted and alarmed. And we think that's a really, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, but we think that's a really important thing to consider as you and your organizations are thinking about your decarbonization goals, and you're thinking about squeezing every little bit out of the operational effectiveness of your facilities and your operations. Having real-time views and being able to look at real-time data and have smart tools that help you not take the time gathering the data, but instead put that time back into your day so that you can actually analyze it well and respond quickly. That's really going to make a big difference in terms of your ability to make measurable change over time. So that's where Wattix fits into the energy and sustainability ERP picture. We talked about EnergyCAP. Now let's move over to CarbonHub. So CarbonHub is, Lalit mentioned that EnergyCAP has had greenhouse gas functionality in it for some period of time, but CarbonHub takes it to an entirely different level, because CarbonHub is really that financial grade greenhouse gas accounting platform that allows your organizations to have the same level of confidence that you do about GHG tracking as you've had historically with maybe utility bill or utility finance tracking as well. That's where CarbonHub plays in terms of EnergyCAP's overall portfolio of tools that make up this ERP. And you'll see at the bottom, there are services. I saw a question that came in about how do we get data into CarbonHub. So we do have services that kind of span the gamut in terms of the products that they support. One of those that many of you are familiar with is bill capture, which is part of a way that you could get data into CarbonHub for reporting. We're going to talk about that when it comes to Scope 1 and Scope 2 reporting data, but we have other services to support as well. So this kind of gives you the big picture, and hopefully gives you a better sense of CarbonHub and where it fits into the model. And again, we have people who are on different parts of their journey. They could be starting at different stages. They might start closer to real time and then move more to the portfolio level, or vice versa. And that's totally okay. We want to be able to meet you where you're at and help you as you continue to progress down that journey. The last thing I'll mention is today, as we demonstrate CarbonHub, you're going to see CarbonHub and EnergyCAP married, and they're connected at the hip. And that's because the initial set of CarbonHub functionality is built as a component that can be turned on within EnergyCAP. However, that's a temporary thing. That was just phase 1. Phase 2, which is rolling out at the end of the summer, CarbonHub is actually going to be its own separate application, sharing data, sharing information across EnergyCAP and Wattix for customers who have multiple products. But CarbonHub is going to be its own application. You're going to see it as part of the login process. Do you want to go into EnergyCAP or do you want to go into CarbonHub? It doesn't look like that today. I don't want that to confuse you. We are going to be having these as independent products, and someone could use CarbonHub 100% independently of EnergyCAP in the near future. Today, we have to show it with the two put together, But we wanted to make sure we explained that so that you know, as we talk about what's coming soon, CarbonHub is its own product, and it will continue to be developed and expanded as its own product over time. Lilith, anything I missed there you want to mention?
No, I think you did a very good job comprehensively covering everything.
So I think following on that theme, I'll just mention that this energy and sustainability ERP, part of the benefits of it is that it does bring multiple people together within your organization looking at the same set of data, supporting similar reporting goals. They may be a little bit different depending on what part of the organization that reporting or analysis might be done for. But especially when we talk about carbon tracking, this isn't one of those things where one person is going to have all the data on their own. Having a platform like CarbonHub allows you to get data from multiple people and keep it all in one place, which is one of the benefits of having this type of a system in place. So with that, Lilith, you want to do some fundamentals of GHG?
Yeah, let's do that. So this is basically all the way back to what's the reason why we are even tracking greenhouse gases. So the reason we want to make sure that we track greenhouse gases is because since the Industrial Revolution, the output of greenhouse gases because of human activity has increased significantly. And that increase, what it does is it traps some of the Earth's outgoing energy into the atmosphere, hence increasing the global temperature. And you've heard the word global warming, climate change, whatever the terminology that we have. One of the biggest causes of that is greenhouse gases. So the major reason for the increase of greenhouse gases, again, from the need for humans to consume more and more energy, whether it's for our comfort, for air conditioning, heating, whether it's for transportation, whether it's for industry, it doesn't matter. We just have a lot of need as we are living in the modern society for a lot of energy. And the energy typically comes from sources of fuel that when burned, they create the greenhouse gases. So I'm sure everybody knew this, but just wanted to go back to the basics and tie that back. The additional thing, especially from the food production, food storage, and then even for your own personal comfort, is those emissions that come from refrigerants. We call them fugitive emissions because typically they're supposed to be in a closed system, but they do sometimes escape, and that's the reason why the term fugitive emissions are used. And those refrigerants can go and last a long time inside our atmosphere. So the common greenhouse gases that we talk about are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Not all gases are created equally. The amount of heat they capture, the duration of time they last in the atmosphere are all different. And to make things easier, everybody is trying to use carbon dioxide as the most common denominator, and to use how much greenhouse gas potential does each of those other gases have. We usually use CO2 equivalent to measure that. So as you can see, it's like methane is 25 times more impactful than carbon dioxide. So if you generate 1 kilogram of methane, it's almost as if you're generating 25 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So those numbers come from IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it's scientists and experts from all over the world that sit together and figure out what the impacts are. Next slide.
Could I add two things to that, Lilith?
Yeah.
One is I think back on one of the classes that I took in college. It was a meteorology class, and I remember the topic of global warming and greenhouse gases came up, and that's where I first understood the difference between greenhouse gases and global warming. Greenhouse gases keep us alive. If we didn't have them, we would be in cold like the vacuum of space. But the global warming is because these gases are increasing, right? So regardless of how you feel about that or whatever, the greenhouse gas effect is part of the atmosphere, is part of what we're doing. And this reporting is really trying to help us understand the change in behavior between where things were and where things are now, and where things are now compared to where they are in the future. The other thing I'll mention, and Lalit talked about the CO2 equivalent, that term that's at the bottom. You'll see if you look at, well, if you watch the news, if you read people's sustainability reports, the term you'll keep hearing is carbon, and sometimes people just generically call it carbon dioxide. Realize that really the metric that people are comparing against each other is CO2 equivalent. So you're going to see that throughout CarbonHub, that we're driving you back to CO2 equivalent. We don't want you to get confused by that. That is the term that everybody's using across the board. We're just giving you a little bit of an insight into how that is calculated and why it's important that the source gases themselves are tracked, because not all gases are created equal.
Yeah, and the reason we go to CO2 is because in the previous chart you see that 80% of the greenhouse gases is CO2. So that's the lion's share of it, and that's why we are using the equivalency to CO2 back. One more thing on this slide is that 25 times of carbon dioxide and 298 times. IPCC meets many times, and they have updated those numbers at regular intervals. And just remember that right now, and Dave or I will cover it in the next future slides, that number can change. And CarbonHub
Right, it
makes sure
hasn't
that
always
we
been 25, it hasn't always been 298 as an
right,
example.
right. And the reason that's important is because we understand that sometimes you may not want it to change because of the past reporting you have done, or you may want to stay current on that, and CarbonHub accommodates for both of them.
That's right.
So we talked about the whole industrial revolution, but buildings and utilities are actually one of the most highest impacts on GHG emissions. So you all live this, you all know this, you're doing it every single day. You know how much energy is consumed at your campus, at your organization, or wherever your business is. It's no surprise to most of our EnergyCAP customers. So there is that natural connection between taking the tracking that you do for energy and utilities, whether it's coming from vendor bills or your own smart meters, and then translating that into GHG. And so you've been doing the work in the past of tracking your energy and utilities, despite the complexities that it in itself it has. But now suddenly you're tasked with tracking and reporting on GHG. And guess what? Not many of us have had trainings. I mean, I worked at University of Nebraska for 20 years, and for me, most of the career there was focused on tracking energy and utilities information. GHG was um, a, a, an afterthought. And as I've joined EnergyCAP, I've actually started learning a lot about it, and I I'm still learning a lot every single day, but it's just amazing that the complexities that it has even bigger. And our goal with CarbonHub is to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for you to focus still on tracking your energy utilities and other data pieces and automating whatever conversion to GHG that you want to do on your behalf. Anything else you want to add there, Dave?
No, that's it. We realize that this may not have been something you asked to have handed to you. A lot of folks that we talk to about those who are responsible for doing carbon tracking and analysis, some people have sought it out, and that's great. And we're happy to have those folks, but we also realize there are a lot of people that this has suddenly become another thing to do. And we want to make that process as easy and as transparent and as reliable as possible for you. And that's really been our goal with CarbonHub all along.
Yeah, so one other thing that we wanted to do when we started looking into this was making sure that we don't get distracted by somebody's thought process or a specific regional thought process. So most of the work we have done in CarbonHub is standardized to greenhouse gas protocol. So this is an agency that has been around more than 20 years. It's a partnership between World Resource Institute, World Business Council for Sustainability Development, and various other governmental industry association, NGOs, etc. So what this does, though, is it becomes a single point of information where it provides standards and guidance and even tools and training for businesses and governments to help measure their impact on the climate warming emissions. So if you want more information, the URL is there, a great source of information, and it is a great source of information for us because we are really zeroing in on using global standards to drive the development of CarbonHub. So when you use CarbonHub, you can have that level of confidence that the data that's built into CarbonHub, the terminology, the information, it's all being driven by something that the world agrees on rather than one part of the world or another country specific or a region specific information. So we'll quickly cover this GHG scopes. Again, it's defined by GHG protocol. You probably have seen me talk about this, but if you're very aware of this, there are 3 distinct scopes that GHG protocol defines for the emissions that we have. So if you are burning any fossil fuel on your site, like if you got a boiler in the basement of a building, or if you have a fleet of vehicles on for your company, you're actually literally burning fossil fuel on your site. Those are classified as scope 1. But you may say, well, I don't want to burn it. I'm going to change that gas boiler to electric boiler, and now I'm not burning anything. Well, guess what now, though? Instead of burning your own gas, you're making your electric company burn gas on your behalf, and you're buying electricity for them. So you don't escape that saying that I don't have any direct emissions. You do have indirect emissions now because that purchased electricity, purchased steam, purchased heating and cooling for your business use is qualified under scope 2 indirect. So that's the interesting dilemma here, is that if you take everybody's scope 1, then we are capturing all the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. But if you want to look at your greenhouse gas emissions impact, you want to also consider scope 1, scope 2, and we'll talk about scope 3 real quick here. So depending on whose perspective you're looking from, the natural gas burned to produce the electricity to make your new electric boiler work on your site, it is scope 1 for the electric grid, but it is scope 2 for you. So it just depends on the perspective of the person that's producing that electricity and whether they are consuming it for themselves or whether they are selling it to somebody else. So that's a very important distinction, that every time we talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, it is from the perspective of your organization. So you need to make sure that that's front and center. So that's pretty simple in a sense. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to add one other comment. One of the things that maybe your organizations are already considering is electrification, which also, if you think about the scope 1, scope 2, is essentially, in some ways, you're trading off things that could potentially have been scope 1 or currently scope 1 for your organization and transferring those into scope 2. And depending on your opportunities for what you can get from an electric perspective, that could, just that particular change could make an impact in terms of your total GHG emissions, because the grid is primarily getting greener as additional renewable resources are being provided and things like that. So even that transition from scope 1 to scope 2 could result in a reduction in some cases. But those are the types of decisions that we realize all of you are making on a regular basis, and that's something that plays into this. And again, it's another reason why it's really important to have good visibility over these numbers so that you can make decisions. So that's all I wanted to add. Go right ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. So that's where things become even more complex when you get to scope 3, because GHG protocol says it's not just the energy that you use within your facility or for electrification of your facilities. It's also all the other activities that take part in upstream. So there are the scope 3 upstream and scope 3 downstream categories that are shown on the picture here. If you purchase goods and services, well, it took some energy to create those goods, or it took some energy for the services that you were provided. So you can't get out of not counting them, because if you purchase less of them, then less of them would have to be produced. Or if you think about business travel, I mean, if you have company jet, then it will still fall under scope 1. But most of businesses, they use commercial aviation, and if you fly that jet, you're really producing emissions that are going into the atmosphere, but you're doing it because you are doing it on behalf of your company to grow your company to whatever effect that you're doing it for. And then the same thing happens on the downstream side. So you have the situation where you've produced a product, but it's not just doing any good sitting in your warehouse. You have to actually deliver it to your customers or to the retail stores or whatever your business is. And you have to make sure that you account for that greenhouse gas emissions from the delivery of those vehicles, for example. So this is where things get really complicated, because in scope 1 and scope 2, you actually get a utility bill for what you consume. The scope 3 categories get a little tricky, because you're not getting the granular amount of usage data and how it relates to emissions very easily. That's where CarbonHub comes in, because this is where we are making sure that you have an easy way to take whatever level of granularity of data that's available to you within your company and get started on the journey of measuring where you stand on your GHG emissions. If you identify that, hey, today I'm only able to do it based on 3 separations away from the emissions, that's great, get started. And as time goes on, you may start moving closer and closer to the source of emissions and the emissions themselves, maybe, to measure that.
One last anecdote that that I'll add, and the folks who sat through the LITs in my training at Catalyst, you heard this statistic already, but this was something that was really eye-opening to both of us earlier this year. We were at a conference, a sustainability conference of leaders across North America, and coming from the energy utility space, which is my background, it's the LIT's background, a lot of what we've heard about is ways to control and manage scope 1, scope 2. And Dell was presenting, and the chief sustainability officer for Dell was presenting. And one of the things that she talked about was how much of their carbon emissions is related to scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3. And we were floored that the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions for Dell worldwide is only 4% of their entire tracked emissions. And that was a real shocker for us. But then as she described it, it started to make more and more sense. And in the primary emission type that they're tracking is actually this use of sold products down here as scope 3, because what does Dell sell? They sell electronics that end up consuming a lot of electricity that live on for many years in data centers and homes and businesses. So for them, that's where they have the biggest impact. So when they're thinking about their global GHG emissions and ways that they can minimize, what they're thinking about is how can we make our products that we're producing more efficient, in addition to maybe improving the way we actually produce them ourselves. So really interesting to hear from different organizations how these are driven, and to really consider just the impact that your company could have on scope 3 emissions if that's something that you work to manage.
Right. So now that we have learned a lot about scope 1, 2, and 3, we are going to test your knowledge. You don't have to respond by unmuting. You don't have to respond by texting. Just answer for yourself, because you're testing your own knowledge. So which scope emissions does this activity represent? I burn natural gas in the building boiler to make steam or hot water to heat my building. Give you 3 seconds. All right, everybody answered in their heads. We're going to go tell you that it's scope 1, yes, because you're burning it on site within your organizational boundary, so it is scope 1. All right, we'll move on to the second one. So which scope emissions does this activity represent? I purchased 200 laptops for my team last year. Give you 5-10 seconds, and you can answer it for yourself. Doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. I got this wrong when I got to learning all of this, so don't worry about it. Right? The answer is scope 3, because you're procuring products to be used for your company. So it's on the upstream side. So before you can produce whatever product or service your organization is offering, you got this for use within your own company. Which scope emissions does this activity present? I use FedEx, UPS to deliver a finished product to the customer. So I produced a product and now it needs to find its way to the customer. So what scope is this? 5 more seconds. Right? It is scope 3, category 9, downstream, because your product is already produced. Now you're spending energy, which is creating greenhouse gas emissions, to send it to whoever needs to receive it. Last question.
Before we move
sorry.
off of this one, I just wanted to also talk about, again, decisions that companies make that make changes to these numbers. If we go back about 10 years ago, most of Amazon's goods and services were delivered by third parties. Now they have been building their own fleet, and I'm not talking about shipping between warehouses, I'm talking about the last mile of delivery. More and more, they're using their own fleets in the United States to deliver. Well, they're actually taking what was scope 3 for FedEx, UPS, USPS, et cetera. They're actually turning that into scope 1 if those are company-owned vehicles and they're actually burning the fuels within that. And that also gives them an opportunity that if they turn that into an electric fleet, as an example, that they could change it into scope 2 as well. So these things, right, it's not fixed forever. There are choices we can make as organizations to impact how things go in the future.
And right, actually going back to that one, if FedEx starts publishing their operational GHG numbers, and UPS did too, and I'm not saying which one is more efficient versus the other. If you're not Amazon and you're still relying on these partners, you may start choosing one versus the other based on their reported emissions. All right, so last one. Which scope emissions does this activity represent? I purchase electricity from my local grid operator. I saved the toughest one for the last. All right, we can see the answer here. It is scope 2, purchase electricity. So this is something, again, we all use, but I wanted to make sure that this got highlighted because it is so obvious that sometimes we overthink things. It's not really. So those are just so that was just a good primer for what is scope 1, what is scope 2, what is scope 3, because CarbonHub is able to handle all of this data for you. And the demo that you're going to see very quickly coming up, you will see why CarbonHub has created this framework that you can use to track it in a granular way. And as your business, your organization shifts your operations to mitigate your carbon impact or work towards whatever decarbonization goals you have, knowing this information, tracking this information, visualizing this information, and analyzing it will help you make more informed choices.
Great. So we've talked through the greenhouse gases. Now, if we kind of think about that, and now we talk about the accounting side of it, actually tracking those things and having information ready to report. Why is that carbon accounting important? Well, there are a lot of things that are weighing in to this particular this being such a hot topic, right? It's no one thing, it's many things. And depending on your organization, you may see more or less of these things, depending on what type of organization you are or where you're located. But there's pressure from stakeholders, pressure for transparency. If you're in higher ed, students, faculty, they want to know. If you're a corporation, people want to know, investors, as an example, or also, just like Lilith mentioned, FedEx, UPS, people want to know what their emissions are so that then you can make better informed decisions as you move into the future. And the public wants to know, if you're in a government organization, again, this doesn't just apply to private, it doesn't just apply to public, it doesn't just apply to education, it applies across the board to all of us. There are also regulations that might be pushing on your organization, whether they are directly pushing on you or maybe indirectly pushing on you. Things like some of the local laws that are being imposed within New York City, But even if we look at state law in the United States, this is also changing. Just this year, 2 proposed state laws in the state of California that will apply both to private and public organizations with revenue over a certain size, which also includes with it not just the reporting, but to have an audited report, right? So it's not just enough to say, well, I think we're about at this, right? If people said, I think we about spent this much money last year, right? From a financial audit perspective, there's no way you'd pass. We're seeing more and more pressure in the industry that organizations like you are having to not only produce this information, make it public, but also be able to show that you calculated it in a way that's repeatable, that's traceable, that's auditable, because those types of rigors are applying to carbon accounting in the same way that they have for financial accounting for many years. And that's a little bit different than our energy data, right? We've been tracking energy data, we've been reporting on energy data, but a lot of that has been kind of internally focused and used for budgeting and planning and opportunities for savings. Greenhouse gas emissions and carbon is considered a public type of data set because it impacts all of us. So therefore, from the very beginning, you want to be thinking about how am I going to make sure that what I'm tracking can get me from source information all the way to the reporting side in a way that I can defend, that I can produce all of the auditable steps that took it from point A to point Z. And you can see here other pressures, federal law pressures, the SEC proposed ruling that may impose this on publicly traded organizations. There are global standards as well. You can look at some of the things that has been happening in Europe, which also has an impact, by the way, on US-based organizations that do certain levels of activity in the EU. We already talked about investor pressure, and then even some lending terms may be preferential if your organization can show that you are thinking about sustainability and taking steps to have a more sustainable organization. The last thing I want to mention here is that even if you said, well, I'm not in California or I don't get regulated by the SEC, realize that even companies that don't have goals or regulations on them today will still need to support carbon reporting requirements that are part of the supply chain. Let me give you an example. You may be a small organization. You could even be, one location, and I produce goods and I supply them to organizations like Walmart or Target or others. Well, even though you may not have a direct requirement to report, Walmart and Target will, and therefore they're going to require more transparency and greater information from all of their suppliers as well. So even if you're not necessarily the direct recipient of this, you may get pressure placed on you by some of your business partners or arrangements. And like I said, just the general public expects more of this out of organizations that they have dealings with on a regular basis. So that's the primer, and we wanted to make sure we went through that so that everybody was kind of caught up on the same level. So then we can talk about mechanically, okay, what do you do? So where do you start? How do you get a handle on this, especially if your organization hasn't been very focused on this in the past? And we're not going to talk on different strategies to reduce carbon today. We've done that in some other forums and things like that. We're not going to talk about that today. What we did want to point out, though, is that there are a number of different business activities and decisions and things that you're doing that could contribute to a change in your GHG emissions. And some of those things could be projects that you're taking on proactively. I talked about things like electrification, decisions that you're making within your organization. You might even get into financial transactions like power purchase agreements or purchasing renewable energy credits to demonstratively lower your GHG emissions overall. So there are many different tools and things that you could use to do this. What's important is that regardless of which strategies you take, that all of these things can be tracked and that you have the ability to demonstrate that positive impact and again tell that story. So that's part of how we've been thinking about CarbonHub, is making sure that regardless of which approaches you take and different things you may be doing to advance your organization, all of that can be tracked in one place and all of it's reportable out of CarbonHub as well. Late, you want to walk us through a little bit of this data journey?
Yeah, so as Dave mentioned, we were at a conference down in Austin last January, and we saw that there were many different organizations represented there. And the goal is eventually to get to maybe real-time decarbonization efforts. But if you think about the overall continuum, you may start with just annual data collection to annual reporting to monthly to real-time. And guess what? Where are most people? And you may not be surprised by seeing this, but most people are down at the annual data collection level. So especially for scope 3, at least for scope 1 and scope 2, if you have monthly bills, you can convert them into GHG data. But most people are still struggling with figuring out how to even begin their journey by collecting data at an annual level. So that's where, again, CarbonHub comes in, and it allows you to collect the data. And then the next question that you'll typically have is, what kinds of data do I need to collect so it can be converted into GHG? So there is some data that is much easier to measure and very easily available. So think about your utility bills. Again, we've talked about this, and you live this day in and day out. They are very ubiquitous and they are very easy to measure because there's an actual meter that's mostly installed in those places because of the requirement to charge for that. But as you keep going down to the bottom left of this chart, you can see that how is my product used? The Dell example, how much electricity will my laptop that I produce as Dell will be consuming through its life cycle? And oh, by the way, what happens when that laptop gets upgraded, the user decided to upgrade to a new laptop, what happens to that old device? Is it just going to go find its way into the landfill, or is it going to be recycled? Those things get harder and harder to measure. The challenge, though, is then to be able to report on scope 1 and 2, scope 1, 2, and 3 of your organization, you need to measure all of these things. As we get closer and closer to the actual emission, we will have high level of accuracy, but it requires either modern sensors or some detailed level of data capture to be able to do that. As you go further away from it, you have to make some assumptions. You have to use some industry rules of thumb to make your progress. And we'll show you some examples of that in a little bit. So what can you do to prepare? Use a energy and sustainability ERP. Leverage the technology to help you, because this energy and sustainability ERP will become that single source of truth for you and your organization to track and report on every sustainability metric across your organization. The challenge, though, is you may or may not have a sustainability director, coordinator, whatever role you have. But even if you have somebody like that, the bigger challenge is that you are relying on the information, that person is relying on the information that they need to get from various different aspects of your organization. So utility consumption, facilities information, transportation metrics, operational data, supplier impact, all of those things are either not captured by the organization, or if they are captured in different siloed information systems. And in addition to that challenge, the bigger challenge even is converting that language. So utility data may be captured in KBTUs. So somebody that you're getting the data from is only providing it to you in KBTUs, and you as the sustainability coordinator have the responsibility of converting into GHG. Or transportation metrics, somebody is tracking it by miles. Now you have to convert it into GHG. Or operational data, how many widgets did we produce? How many units of steel did we purchase last year? How many dollars did we spend on advertising? All that pieces of information are A, stored in multiple different data sources, and B, are stored in different units of measure. And now it's up to the sustainability director, coordinator, or maybe it's now your responsibility to your organization to convert that into GHG and then able to track and report on that. So that's where the energy and sustainability ERP, a good quality one like we have in CarbonHub, will come to your aid, because we will make that as automated as possible so you can focus on your job. Because that journey to decarbonization chart that Dave showed earlier, that in itself is a huge challenge. You don't want to be bogged down in the clerical effort of converting incoming data into GHG and basically spend all your time doing that. Instead, focus on the action part of what you're going to do to reduce your carbon footprint, but let the clerical part be taken over by the software.
So, getting started. Let's start with the easy stuff. And we mean easy because, like Lilith mentioned, it could be easier to gather the data. In fact, utility bills come to you, right? So whether we like it or not, that data is actually pushing towards us. So we're going to start by talking through scope 1 and 2 emissions and how do you track that in CarbonHub? And if you have CarbonHub and EnergyCAP, what does that look like? So you want to use the data you're already receiving on your utility bills. We're going to glean that data. And now if you think about it, in EnergyCAP historically, we've had two different sets of data that we've gleaned from a utility bill. We've been able to support the financial reporting and we've been able to support the energy reporting. Well, now you can think about this as a third bit of information that's all coming from that single source, and that's your carbon emissions or your carbon as well. All of that information is coming here. So that's important. We made a note here to make sure that you're getting all the data and that it's accurate use information. That's really, really critical. And the reason we mention that is we know that some of the folks that were on the line, you may represent an organization that has multiple campuses. You may have multiple sites. It's possible that you or your team is only responsible for paying for some of the utility bills within your organization. You need to make sure you're thinking broadly, because just because maybe you don't get that bill, maybe even somebody else gets the bill, they take care of it today and you don't even see it. You have to think comprehensively about this, because if you're going to have a holistic view of your emissions data, you need to make sure that you're first off getting all the right inputs and that you're not missing something. So we definitely recommend taking a moment, sitting down with your team, thinking through it and saying, do we really have it all? Is there anything that might be out there as a tentacle somewhere that we don't have access to today? And maybe you don't need it from an energy reporting perspective. You might not even need it from a financial reporting perspective, but maybe you need to start getting that data because it applies to your GHG emissions. So that's something to really think about as you're stepping into this. So
And a
great
great example of that was when I was at University of Nebraska. As Dave said, from energy perspective and accounting perspective, it didn't matter. The Nebraska campus that I worked at in Lincoln actually had outreach facilities 300 miles away in Scottsbluff and other small towns across Nebraska. And the units there were responsible for their own budget, so they would get the utility bill and they would just pay it. It never got captured by the overall organizational need because it was taken care of. But now if you're really going to have a comprehensive GHG information for University of Nebraska, you need to bring that in instead of letting that be just paid off from a different source of money.
That's great. Thank you for that example. So once you have your utility bills, what we need to do is we need to apply GHG factors that take what has been consumed, what you have purchased or what you have burned, as an example, on your property or within your vehicles. We need to take that information, we need to translate that into GHG emission factors. And there are several different sources of information to get those types of translations. There's information available from the Environmental Protection Agency. There's international data that's available for the raw fuels. Within the United States, we have information that's available from the EPA about electricity, and internationally, there are other organizations that you can pay for some of that data from. And there are other factors. So these things, some of these things are have been used for years. Some may be new or different, and maybe you haven't even considered that. That's one of the things that we're also trying to simplify as part of CarbonHub, is realize that CarbonHub is not just a software package. There's also a service component behind it where we're providing a lot of information so that you can focus on your data and how your data matters without having to worry about kind of all these ancillary things on the side. So that's why we're bringing in this factor information to help you translate your data using documented, well-known patterns and things like that, as Lilith mentioned, industry-based information to help you get from your utility bills into the GHG factors. And I've highlighted here some of those things that, as part of CarbonHub, we are going to keep up to date for our customers. So when we do that translation, what are we doing? We're taking the use information or whatever it is that you've consumed represented here by 500 kilowatt hours here in the bill. We're multiplying that times one or more factors, and I say more than one because if you recall what Lalit mentioned before, each of the different greenhouse gases has a different impact on the environment. So this multiplication actually can occur multiple times based on different gases to eventually get to your CO2 equivalent, right? Your carbon dioxide equivalent, which is your emissions for that particular activity within your organization. So several steps there. It's also important to note that those conversion factors that are in the middle, those change over time. So this is an electric example. Every year, the EPA produces new e-grid values that represent what the fuel mixes looked like on the utility grid for a particular year. So these aren't static values. It's not like saying, well, I know that there's always 12 inches in a foot, right? That's something we never have to question. These factors are a living thing that do change year over year in many cases. So that's something you need to consider as you're thinking through this carbon reporting picture. Okay, so we've gone through a lot of background. Let's get into CarbonHub. Let's show you a little bit about what it's like to track scope 1 and 2. And in particular, we're going to also show the relationship between EnergyCAP and CarbonHub, because as we mentioned before, right now those two products are really married together. And even when CarbonHub is its own independent application, we're going to still take the data, like I'm going to show today, from utility bills that you're tracking in EnergyCAP and convert those into carbon for reporting purposes within CarbonHub. So let me get...
While Dave is pulling that up, if you have a question, please post it in the discussion tab. And if you want to actually speak up and ask your question verbally, just text that request to speak, and we will promote you to a speaker, and you then will be able to communicate verbally.
Thanks, Lalit. So I'm going to demonstrate this using the database that all of you had access to as part of the Catalyst process, and you still have access to today, so that you can see this relative to some of the things that we've tracked. So I just logged in through EnergyCAP Home, and I'm going to click on this Catalyst read-only database. And again, I'm going into both a combination of EnergyCAP and CarbonHub together. So let me go ahead and navigate over here to the buildings and meters tree. And this is where you're going to see the CarbonHub functionality really at its most within EnergyCAP today before it becomes its own application. So you'll notice first thing that there's this CarbonHub tab at the top. And if I click on that, similar to the other tabs of data that you're used to seeing within EnergyCAP, CarbonHub rolls up information in a hierarchical view. So it rolls up information from subcomponents up into reporting data sets. And in fact, this is using all of, if you remember from the presentation I made at Catalyst, this is using all of our new charts and graphs, and all this information is easily downloadable as images, and you can export the data and you can see the raw values for all of the things that are represented here within CarbonHub. So when we talk about the process of tracking scope 1 and scope 2, all right, we're talking about fuels that you are either burning, or it's an indirect that you're getting through electricity or through a district energy supplier, something like that. So the first thing to note is that you don't have to manually go and set this up on every single meter individually. You can have some defaults that apply based on your location, based on other factors within your organization. So up here in the module menu, there's a whole new section here for CarbonHub that's available as you subscribe to CarbonHub. So the first place I want to go here is the new meter defaults. And what this says is that every time I add a new meter for tracking utility bill data within EnergyCAP, is there a default that we should apply for GHG conversion factors? And you can see here that for some of the commodities that are within this database, we've done that for, and some we haven't. Let's take a look as an example for natural gas. So for natural gas, there are two things that we've identified. First is, which scope and category should this emissions be reported to? Is it scope 1? Is it scope 2? Is it scope 3? And then within each of those, is it even more granularly yes, it's not only scope 3, but it's this particular category within scope 3. Or in this case, within scope 1 for natural gas, we're actually tracking stationary combustion. Okay, so it's a very specific category within scope 1. And when we look at the factors that can be applied, there are several factors that are built into CarbonHub that I can select from here as my emissions factor that's going to take my utility bill information, translate it into GHG emissions. Because I have a default here, every time I create a brand new meter that is a natural gas meter, CarbonHub will automatically apply this scope and this factor to that meter. Now, am I stuck with that forever? Absolutely not. You have flexibility and you can change it whenever you want to, but this is a great time saver because it means that, especially if you're not necessarily the one who's creating all the meters in your database, that at least sane defaults are being applied. Or perhaps you don't want a particular default applied because it's important that you and your team set something very specific. You can also come here and simply by not putting a scope category or a default factor, that will mean that whenever the next meter is created of that commodity, it will be devoid of having any factor or GHG emissions calculated for it. So we've provided the ability here, and you can see the commodities that are being tracked, and then if you have commodities that you're not currently using today, those are also here as well. But the ones that you're actively using within your EnergyCAP database, those all appear up here at the top of the screen. Now, a particular one of note, especially for those based in the United States, is electricity. So there's a little bit of extra smarts that we've applied to the electricity assignment. And this is because the EPA's eGrid factors, and eGrid being the tracking of emissions from electricity being produced in the United States, they break that information up in several different ways. One is by region of the country, and the other is by particular US states. So we have an option that's available for electric only that allows you to say, please auto assign my particular GHG factors based on wherever this building is located, right? So when I add my meter to my building, we'll use the address information from the meter to automatically assign the meter to the eGrid region for your particular state. All right. So I could use that, or I could say, I'm going to go pick a very specific factor that I want to use. That would be okay. But this is a special option that's available. We didn't want you to miss that. That's for electric only because different parts of the United States have different eGrid factors. And if you span multiple areas, this could be a time saver for you, help make sure that you've got the right thing assigned. Like I said, though, you're not limited. If you happen to know that you wanted to have something assigned for a particular state, you could simply search for that information and you could assign that particular factor directly and just say, every time a new meter is created, I want it to automatically be created in Pennsylvania.
And real quick there, Dave, can you also point out that we bring in data for international locations also? So if you have operations outside of United States, you can see in that drop down that Dave was looking at, you can go look for whatever country or specific area that you want to find.
Yeah, that's right. Whether it's a default or you're doing it on a meter by meter basis, part of that service that we're providing as part of CarbonHub is we're actually subscribing to purchase international electric factors that we're getting from IEA that we're making available to our CarbonHub customers. So you do have that ability to identify particular countries, and even within those countries, you can choose between just I buy off the grid normally, or maybe you know that you have a purchase agreement that uses a particular fuel type. You can pick that. All of this information is here, and you'll see in a moment, this isn't just a one-time factor. This includes a history of factors. In fact, the IEA data goes back as far as 1990 that we've loaded into the database as well. And you can also set up, non-traditional items for EnergyCAP, things that are not necessarily energy based, like air travel and things like that. That falls into the scope 3. We're going to come back to scope 3 in a little bit. So this is a nice time saver. Now you might be saying, okay, that's great. I have my meter and it's created, but again, maybe I didn't have this set up in the past. And I'd like to be able to go update a lot of my meters at the same time, or at least go check my meters to make sure that I got it right. Are there any options for that? Well, there sure are. So if we go right back here to the module menu and we go back to the CarbonHub section, you'll notice that there's an option to update GHG for existing meters. And when you select that, we provide a setup spreadsheet that is filled with your meter information. So if I go ahead and do that, one thing to note here is I could just get every meter that's within my database and I could see, see them all. I can say, like is specified here, just give me the ones that don't currently have a factor assigned to them, because I want to make sure that everything that should has it. You could even filter down even further and say, well, really what I want to know is if I have any electric meters that don't have any factors assigned, right? And this will allow me then to go and see all of them. Or maybe I say, you know what, I just want to do an audit of all of my electric meters. And I can just remove this filter and I'll download the spreadsheet. This is also a great way, as a side note, it's a great way to be able to just check your information and make sure that it's accurate. Let me zoom in here a little bit. So what you'll see here is a list of all of my electric meters in the database, the background information for each one of those meters, and then over here on the side, I can now see which scope category each of those has been assigned to, and I can see which GHG factor has been assigned. So this is similar to that drop-down list that we were just looking at within the application. In this particular case, I have many that are in RFC East. That's because this part of Pennsylvania is part of the RFC East E-Grid region, and that's what we're using. But we could have changed that to another country. You can see here we have some examples for different states. We have some that are assigned to different global factors as well. So lots of easy options to both verify your data and make a change. If you needed to, you could simply change any of these scope categories or factors, come right back into CarbonHub, browse for that file, upload it. Your meters will automatically update, and we will recalculate all of the GHG emissions for any meter that was changed as part of that process. So that's a really easy way to both check and update your meters. And again, right now we're thinking about scope 1 and scope 2 in particular. Let's go to a particular meter and look at its assignment. So I'm here on this building called City Hall. Let's start with this natural gas meter. And first off, I'm just going to show you that we've provided some of this information in various places on the meter. So depending on where you're looking, you might be able to have a little glimpse of this. You can always go to the CarbonHub tab and you get all the information. But from the Properties tab, one of the sections that we added, and you may have seen if you're setting up a new meter or looking at a meter's properties, is that we've added this section here where the GHG data is recorded. And you can see both the scope and category that's been assigned. You can also see which particular factor has been applied to this meter as well. And if this was set because it was a default, we give you this little blue box. This does not mean there's a problem. We just wanted to provide additional context to everyone that lets you know, and you can see that right here, that this meter has automatically been assigned a system GHG factor based on the meter's address or commodity. So when this meter was created, we used the default. No one has changed it. So if you're on a meter and it's still using the default, that might be fine. In some cases, you might say, oh yeah, I need to override that. I need to put something in more specific. We included this just as a way for you to be able to quickly recognize those types of meters. Now you can link right here to the history of this meter and the GHG factors, but I'm going to head over to CarbonHub because I can get to that information here and I can also see the reporting data. So when I go to the CarbonHub tab, a couple things to point out. First off, same scope category information listed here, as well as the GHG factor that's being applied, right? And we've given you information here that says, hey, this is still using the default as well. Again, just trying to draw your attention to that, make sure that's what you want done. Now we can see the historic information here, and as I mentioned before, each of these charts you can expand and download, etc. But there are some actions that are available. First off, what if this is not the specific emissions factor that you wanted to apply? Well, you can update that right here. You can change the scope category information. You can update the factor that's being applied to a particular meter as well. What if you're not sure? Well, we've also provided some in-depth help information to help you educate you and your teams about where things might fall. So here is a description of not just the scopes, but the individual categories within each of the scopes. And then we also provide additional links off to the greenhouse gas protocol that Lalit mentioned before. And there's a lot of information in the Help Center to also guide you through this process. So I could change this right here. I also could disable GHG tracking. And I could say, you know, this meter shouldn't have been tracked. Maybe because of a bill split or something else, this is a duplicative meter. And you don't want that to happen. Well, you can simply disable GHG tracking and we let you know, okay, we'll wipe out all of the GHG data related to this and we'll take off the factor. You can always come back and add another one later on. So let's head over to this electric meter. So natural gas, scope 1, this electric meter, scope 2, purchased electricity. We can see right now that this particular factor is actually using a California-based factor for this particular meter. If I wanted to change that, again, I can come in here and update the scope category or factors. Maybe it's not in California, maybe it was on the border and I need to put it in a different state, or maybe I need to apply some other factor for a different region. We'll talk about custom factors in just a little bit. You can update that right here and the information will update in the background. The other thing to note is that when you're looking at factors, you can also see the history of each of the factors. So right now we're using this factor called WECC California. If we go in and we look at the linked factor history, you can see that this was provided from the EPA eGrid system. And you can see how this factor has changed over time. So this is where I talked about the fact that it's not just like converting from inches to feet, right? There is this interplay that the factors change over time. Here's a good example of that. And you can actually see how the grid in California has been getting cleaner through the years as well. So this information's all available on each meter that is configured for tracking GHG emissions. You can easily make changes to that information. You can use spreadsheets to do it in bulk to see where you're at within the system. Those options are all up here in the module menu under CarbonHub. Okay.
A quick comment there. One of the other reasons that we made that information very transparent is because the feedback we got from some of the sustainability leaders when we were designing this was, hey, I'm not 100% confident where you're getting your GHG data. And when they report it downstream or when they report it to their reporting agencies, they want to have that level of confidence that the information that we are using to convert from your electricity to carbon or natural gas to carbon, it's very transparent. So that was a big reason, the feedback we got from users like you. So that's what's helping us make this product better. So we hope that we continue to learn from you to make this product applicable for your daily use.
So what the background, just as a reminder, every time a utility bill is entered on a scope 1 or scope 2 meter, we're taking that information and we're going through those GHG factors to create your CO2 equivalent. And the other thing to note is that this information is calendarized. What do I mean by that? We're using the same engine that EnergyCAP uses to take utility bills and break them into individual calendar months of the year. Why is that important? Well, here's a quick example. If you get a quarterly propane bill or delivery or something like that, if we were not to calendarize it, what you would see is a big spike of GHG emissions and then nothing for 2 months, and then a spike in GHG emissions and then nothing for 2 months. What calendarization allows us to do is it takes that information from your entry from the start date to the end date, and we break up that information across months. And we actually do it using weather sensitive data to be able to determine which months you used that particular commodity in. We're taking that information and then running it through the GHG calculations, because sometimes that also has an impact if you're near one of those timeframes where a factor is changing between two different sets of factors. Now we can actually say, well, this is what you consumed in January. Let's go look up what the January active factor is, and we're going to use that to convert to GHG. So it's a very methodical, very well thought out process, and that calendarization prevents your organization from having these really weird outputs because everything gets dumped into a given month. That really applies when you're thinking about scope 3, and maybe you're only doing annual recording, and you could have this huge spike in January when you recorded the data and then nothing for the rest of the year. Know that every part of CarbonHub runs through our calendarization engine in the same way that all your utility bills run through that calendarization engine today for reporting within EnergyCAP. So there are a couple other things to think about with scope 1 and scope 2. Although they may be a little more straightforward than scope 3, there are still some things to think about. We talked about the default factors that can save you time. You also need to be thinking about what is the right GHG conversion factor for your organization. Some are really simple, and things like natural gas be pretty plain. Others may not be. Electricity is a good example of that. You may get to a place where you need to apply a custom factor, right? So that could mean that, well, we have a power purchase agreement that's a little bit different. We're paying somebody a different amount so that we have cleaner energy. And therefore, there's no way EnergyCAP or CarbonHub would know that, because this is a special agreement that just we have with our supplier. What do you do with things like that? Well, you can create custom factors. This is also really helpful if you are an organization that is running central plants. You can actually have your own custom factor of the output of your central plants that you apply to downstream facilities. Like a steam plant could have a custom factor that gets applied to all the buildings on a campus, so that you can do building level reporting with a very custom factor. And I'll show you in a moment the tools we built into the CarbonHub to make that happen. You also want to be thinking about any groupings. Maybe you want to have special attributes or things that you're using on your meters to group them together, or maybe even the way you lay out your hierarchy so that the reporting, it matches the expectations of stakeholders or those that you need to provide the data to. So here was just a quick example of how a power purchase agreement might put you in a different category than the general grid. Therefore, you may need to model something like this, and you can see here that this particular, if this was our power purchase agreement, we may have some very specific factors that we need to apply in that particular case. And again, CarbonHub provides the opportunity to do that. And I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. Now, there are a couple of other gotchas that we want you to be aware of. First off, how often do your factors change? And how are you going to keep those up to date? And this is really something that is moving people who may have historically tracked this through spreadsheets or other offline formats into a tool like CarbonHub, because these factors do change on a regular basis. And that's something that we're, again, providing as a service, that we're going to continue to maintain the factors that we provide in CarbonHub as they change over time. And it's really clear when they are versioned, so you know exactly which data got factor A versus factor B. Second is something that Lalit touched on before. Which global warming potential values will you use to convert GHG gases to CO2e? So we talked earlier about methane being about 25 times worse as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Well, that comes from these assessment reports that are done on a regular basis, where scientists study the gases and determine essentially how bad a particular gas is for the environment when it comes to the greenhouse gas effect. So within CarbonHub, we allow you to choose which assessment report you would like. The two that we have built into the system today are Assessment Report version 4 and Assessment Report version 5. Assessment Report version 6 is currently under development. Once that's available, we'll add that to the system as well. So you decide as an organization, do I want to use Assessment Report 4, 5, or 6? Why does this even matter? Well, some people prefer to stay up to date, and they say, okay, well, whatever the latest information that's available, we'd like to move to that. That's fine. We can support that within CarbonHub. The thing to think about, though, is that does also change your historic records. So if, as an example, as part of AR6, methane is determined to be 26.5 times worse than CO2, that would mean that if you move to that assessment report, that all of your historic calculations for methane to CO2 equivalent would also be updated. So some people like that. Some people do not like that because it changes historic values. That's why we give customers the choice to tell us which assessment report would you like us to use, or do you want us to just apply the latest available? Also, if you have offsets or power purchase agreements or renewable energy credits, how do you model those? Okay, this matters. So we've given a lot of flexibility within CarbonHub to model it in several different ways. One thing to think about is what might be most appropriate for your organization based on your reporting needs. Do you need to report location-based, which means how much did I consume, separate from market-based, which means, yes, I consumed this much from the grid, but I had a power purchase agreement that actually made my electricity less bad. Therefore, my effective CO2 emissions are actually lower. Location-based says you're not allowed to count that. Market-based says you do count that. You can model, one of the values of CarbonHub is that you can model it in such a way, and I can show you in just a second, you can model it in such a way where you can separate the renewable energy credits from what you are consuming. Therefore, you can report location-based, and the combined view would be the market-based as well. So let's quickly show you custom factors, offsets, renewable energy credits. How are those handled? I keep going the wrong direction here. How are those handled within CarbonHub? Well, up here from our module menu, you may have noticed that there was an option for custom GHG factors. And in fact, we provide a lot of links to this. If you remember when I was in the new meter defaults, there was an option to update custom factors here as well. But the main place to go is right here in the module menu, custom GHG factors. And we realized that a lot of this information, it could be a bulk setup that you need to do, especially if these factors changed over time. So the mechanism that we've provided is, again, through a setup spreadsheet. And I'm going to go ahead and download this, and you can filter this to a particular commodity type. Maybe you only are thinking about electricity as an example, so you only need to have electricity information that's available. You could filter it to steam. You could just say, give me all of my factors for my particular database. All of those are valid options. I'm going to go ahead and download my emission factors for electricity. Now, I'm going to tell you, this spreadsheet's going to have a lot of them because, as I mentioned, CarbonHub contains information from eGrid, including past versions, as well as information for other international grid operators. So let me bring this over and show you this spreadsheet here and explain a little bit about how this is set up and how this works. So first, I'm going to take you to the second tab of this spreadsheet. You'll notice that this is locked and it's called System Factor List. One of the things we wanted to do was, again, provide great transparency about the factors we're using and allow you to see that raw information, because you might want to use some of that in a calculation. For instance, if you had a power purchase agreement to say, okay, well, actually, I'm going to take this and maybe I have 60% greenhouse gas emissions based on my power purchase agreement. So we wanted to provide this information to you. So this second tab contains all of the factors that are in CarbonHub that are available to you for use. So you can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, we were looking earlier at factors from around the globe. So here's Africa factors, and if I head down further, and if, by the way, you can see just how many, here we are at line number 14,000, we're still going, right? So this is Denmark using non-renewable wastes, right? That is a factor that we maintain. And you can see here that it maps to the electric commodity. You can see the history of the factor over time. So you can see that we have a version that was effective in January 2020, 2019, 2018, etc. We provide information about where we got that factor from. And then we provide a list of all of the gases that are the source gases being tracked as part of that factor and the source amounts. And then finally, the very last thing that we provide over here on the side is the converted value into CO2 equivalent. So you can see how that particular transition is happening from source gas into CO2 equivalent. Now, again, this information's here because you may want to reference it. You could also even copy it and make your own factors that are very similar, but maybe a little bit different from some of the factors that have been provided. As an example, I can copy this information and come over here to the other tab. This other tab allows me to create my own and see my own. So I can tell right now, I have no custom electric factors. If I did, they would be listed in this part of the spreadsheet. Now, I'm not going to talk through all the details because we provide help information here and in the Help Center, but we do have the ability to add as many rows of information here as you want. So you can have a custom factor that represents a PPA, custom factor that represents the output from a steam plant or a chilled water plant, etc. You name the factor the way you'd like to name it. So let's say we had a special power purchase agreement in Denmark, as an example. You pick which commodity it applies to. Coming over here, you say, when does this factor become available for use? Let's say that this was from 2019 as an example. I could enter that information. Ignore that, that's just because of the way I pasted it. And then over here, we can pick which gases are being tracked. And of note, yes, we talked about the three primary GHG gases, CO2, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. That is not all that you can track within CarbonHub. In fact, we have 88 different gases and refrigerants that you can choose from. For each one of these, we have then the assessment report data to convert this into CO2 equivalent. So you can track all of these different gas types. We even have a catch-all because we understand for certain reporting, you may not know all those details, and you can simply say this is just other gases. Or if somebody gives you the information and it's already been converted into CO2 equivalent, you could actually choose that as the gas that you're tracking. Again, this will be transparent all the way through CarbonHub from where you're entering the data all the way through to reporting on the other side. So that's how you can create custom factors. You can make many of them. You could create one and have it change over time. Really, the sky's the limit when it comes to this. We wanted to make it very flexible, and we wanted to give great transparency into the factors that we're using so that you could use those and provide those to others, but also if you wanted to build off those to build some of your own custom factors as well. Lalit,
Yeah,
did you
and
have
the
a
key
comment there?
here is that the key here is that the situation depends. You may never ever need a custom factor, and you never have to worry about it. You push the easy button, use the meter address, and everything just flows for you. But we wanted to make sure that we cater to all our customers and the complex situations that they have. While this may seem a little daunting, but the flexibility that this tool gives you allows you to capture all those complex scenarios that you may find yourself facing in your organization.
Thanks, Lalit. So that's custom factors. Now let's talk a little bit about renewable energy credits and offsets. And we have some examples of those set up here as well. So for this particular organization, they've decided to track those in a different part of their tree. This could be because they want to separate location-based reporting from market-based reporting. You can choose how you want to track this. You're not limited. But here's an example we actually have built into our CarbonHub data set, new commodities that can be used to track this information. So here, as electric renewable energy credits, right, or RECs, we've actually split those between non-solar and solar-based because sometimes you pay a different amount for both types. Sometimes you have to have a certain amount of solar to meet certain state credits. You can track all of that here in CarbonHub. How do you enter the information? Well, today, because CarbonHub and EnergyCAP are tethered together, these things are recorded like utility bills, okay? What we really need is the start date, the end date, and the quantity From there, we can do the calendarization, we can do the conversion. Now, in this particular case, this customer has decided to actually record the cost of the renewable energy credits as well. So they can actually do cost-based reporting. That's not required, but they chose to do that as part of their tracking. That's absolutely fine. As we move into CarbonHub being its own independent application, data entry for things like this will only get even easier. There's nothing that the new version of CarbonHub will, through its simplification process, allow you to do that you can't do in EnergyCAP today. It might just feel a little weird that you're entering a bill for something that you want to track that you didn't get a utility bill for. Know that it's going through the same engine and the same processes as it flows through to CarbonHub as maybe a regular utility bill would. But here's an example of where someone has recorded both non-solar and solar RECs. They've entered that information as megawatt hours in this particular case. So what kind of factor is applied to that? Well, they actually use this GHG renewable energy credits factor for RFC East. And you'll notice that the GHG impact is actually negative. And they were able to assign it to this scope 2 category that we have for carbon offsets and adjustments. So they can easily separate it from electricity. They could also have chosen to put it into the electricity bucket, their choice. But here you can see those outputs. Now I'm looking at this level. If I roll this up and I look at the overall organization's impact, this is now showing me the combined view of the electricity I'm using, and I'm getting credit for the RECs that are here as well. So I have all of that information available to me. I can see that here in my scope 2 data, and I can see additional details here about each of those different elements. The same is true with carbon offsets, and we haven't talked a lot about those. Those are an option. They're really kind of the last resort if you can't do anything else, but we do have the ability through a new commodity type for you to be recording carbon offsets and being able to record those and assign them to whatever scope and category best apply. In a similar manner, all we really need to know is the date range that they apply for. So in this case, this goes from the beginning of 2022 to the end of 2022. The quantity, and again, the cost is optional. In this particular case, the customer decided that they wanted to track the costs associated with their offsets. They did not have to. Once they have that information, you can see here we actually have a factor called carbon offset that can be used. It's simply a negative CO2e number that's being applied. And this allows you a ton of flexibility to be able to be placed on any building, on any campus, at any level within your tree to be represented in your reporting data as well. So multiple options, a ton of flexibility. You could put it on the building, you could put it not on the building. Really just depends. You could track cost, you could not track cost, totally up to your organization. You can use custom factors, you can build your own. They can be modified over time with new versions. All of those options are available to you in CarbonHub today. And please know, everything that I'm showing you, none of this is pre-production. This is all available live for all of our CarbonHub customers today. This is a production database. So that's a little bit about kind of the gotchas of scope 1 and 2. We wanted to make sure that we covered some of those things before we moved on to scope 3, which is admittedly a newer topic for many people as they're thinking about their carbon journey. So when we talk about the scopes, just going back to where we were before, scope 1, scope 2, people are a little bit more familiar with that. You have a little bit more experience. Scope 3 now talks about your upstream impacts and your downstream impacts, and the reporting for both of those. The way things are reported is that you don't just say it's scope 3, you assign it to very specific categories within scope 3 so that people who are reading your reports understand which part of the business has this particular impact. Now, it's important to note that there are several different ways that you could get to the GHG emissions associated with scope 3. And if you think about that chart that Lilith had before, some data is easier to get to and is more readily available, and others a lot harder to find. Each organization really has to think about this based on the context of the data that's available to you, how important that data is to you, et cetera. But there's a real spectrum here of data. You could spend the rest of your life tracking down every bit of CO2 accuracy, but in reality, there's probably going to be a trade-off that your organization makes based on the availability of data and the amount of time or energy that might go into tracking a particular scope category. So here you can see at the bottom, our least detailed or accurate method is to say, what did I spend on something in the past? And there are actual factors that you can use to say, well, if I spent that much on office supplies, that translates into a certain amount of GHG. Now, is that fully accurate? No, right? Because that's industry averages and things like that, but it may be sufficient. In other cases, you may have very detailed information that you're getting from suppliers who've done a really good job of tracking their GHG emissions, or maybe they're a key supplier and they're giving you granular data that then you can use. Again, there's a full spectrum here. Not all data types require the same level of detail. That's really important. You don't have to say, well, it's an all or nothing. I have to have 100% fully accurate data versus some data that I'm basing off of cost. You can use a variety of these approaches depending on the data type that you're tracking. So when you're getting into scope 3 tracking, you want to consider your impacts and walk through as an organization. And to tell you the truth, this is what we did at EnergyCAP, thinking through where are our impacts, because some of these categories don't really apply to certain organizations based on the type of organization that they have. At EnergyCAP, we're not producing physical goods. Therefore, there are some scope 3 categories that just don't apply to us. So the first step, though, is to walk through those categories and identify the ones that do matter to your organization. The next step is to say, where can you get your data, right? What data is available to you? What do you already have that you could just start using today? What data might be available within your organization, but it's in a different group and it's just not available directly to you, but it might be there. What's available from your suppliers or your vendors? And then the last thing is, are you missing any important data? And if you are, can you use expert judgment or estimates or similar data? I go back to that Dell example. They talk to us about how they estimate the use of product, and they do it through observations and studies and surveys of their customers to understand how much electricity or other resources are being used by their downstream customers. So you may have to use expert judgment in some of these cases as well if the data is not available to you. So we wanted to walk you through something that we did just a little bit ago, and I can't take credit for this. Lalit was the one who really took the charge and said, hey, let's think about EnergyCAP's impact on GHG emissions, and let's think about how we are going to track it as an organization going forward. And I'll tell you, not everything is the finest grain level of detail. We're not there. Some things are closer, some things are farther away, but we've walked through this process ourselves. Lalit, you want to take us through this a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the biggest thing was, hey, now we have a tool, so we should probably walk the talk. We should also measure our own impact of GHG based on the activities that EnergyCAP and its employees engage in. So the key there was first starting to think through all the categories that actually apply to what we do. So there were some that didn't even apply. So those that applied, like purchase goods and services, business travel, employee commuting, we talked through those within our group and figured out that these areas do apply to what our business does. And then the next step is to say, do we capture that data? And if we do, where is the most likely place that which information system do we capture that information in? So for us, it was financial records, category spending by GL breakdown, and then what data was available for us from our suppliers and vendors. So as we started going through that process, we realized that we don't have as much data from our suppliers and vendors. So we need to start engaging in a dialogue with them to see if they can provide us more accurate information. And then the last thing was, is there anywhere where we could use reasonable estimates or expert judgment? For example, employee commuting, if we knew how many people we had, approximately how many miles they commute to work, how many days a week they come to work, and what kind of engines they use for their vehicles and what their fuel economy is. we started to use those aspects. You can see here, it was not one size fits all. So we had to first identify which categories impacted us, where we could get that information, and what reasonable um, estimates we can make to come up with the data that we needed to make. And then, so employee commuting was one of those where we said, let's see if we can come up with a good, reasonable estimate. So from going through that process, we were like, well, we knew for each year how many employees we had. We had good options for estimating approximately how many miles they would travel. And then there was a lot of other public data that was available to support our estimates. So the mechanics of the calculation was we figured out how many employees we had, whether they were driving or taking mass transit. So we applied that per employee and came up with the total miles driven or ridden. And I think, Dave, you have a spreadsheet of that information that I thought you had pulled up already.
Yep, I
So
do.
in full transparency, this is the information. So Dave, you want to walk through that? Do you want me to?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So as Lalit said, and we realize, could we get more accurate than this? Absolutely. We could start this year polling our employees, doing surveys, asking people to record this information. But we didn't have that for the past. So we said, let's use some expert judgment instead. We took our years of the last few years of data, took a number of employees, we assigned them to the number of days per year or days per week that they were commuting. We used figures that were provided in the United States based on average commuting information to come up with our values for each of the years. And as you know, COVID had some impacts on that as well. So you can see in 2019, we had a lot more employees that were coming into the office 5 days a week compared with 2021 as an example. So we map this out again using expert judgment. Is it 100% accurate? No. Is it defendable? Absolutely. It's absolutely defendable. And we did that not only for our State College office, we did it for the Denver office, which opened in 2022. And also in 2022, we started our Dublin office in Ireland. So we started to put that information there as well. Now, we also did the same thing, and we said, some of those employees in the Dublin office use mass transit on a regular basis. So we also created a second tab that had mass transit information. And in particular, that's the only office where that happens on a regular basis, but it does happen on a regular basis. We recorded that. And again, we use publicly available data to support our estimates for this. Once we had this, we were able to take that information and then track it within CarbonHub. So if we take a look here, you'll notice that one of these particular nodes that's available to you in this database is EnergyCAP LLC. We're recording all of our corporate activities here. And if you look at our EnergyCAP offices, here are our 3 offices in Boalsburg, that's where I am, Denver, and then in Dublin. And if we look in Boalsburg, you'll notice that we included this ENC commuting Boalsburg. And what we did is we simply took that information from those spreadsheets and we entered it in on a yearly basis. So if we open up any one of these, you'll see that we've got information for how many miles were driven Boalsburg, Denver, and in Dublin in a given year. And here you can see the start and end date. This represents an entire year. This is again where the calendarization is nice because it actually divides it up month by month into each of the months of the given year. And you can see here we're using a GHG factor called US passenger car emissions per mile. That's a publicly available factor that we have available within CarbonHub. And you can see that we assigned this to scope 3, category 7, which is employee commuting. So this information is all part of that. And now you can see if we head up to the Boalsburg office, when we look at our carbon footprint, now we've got some scope 3 showing up. It's not the only scope 3, but it is a large portion of our scope 3 that is showing up. And you can actually see that information here. And you can see that our employee commuting, here is our tons of CO2e between March of 2022 and February of 2023 that's been recorded so far. So that's an example of where we thought we could have some very reasonable data that we could use as part of the process. Unfortunately, we don't have that for everything. And that's where having multiple options for recording scope 3 is really important. And we're going to walk through that as part of our next step. So we just did this demo showing you how we can track when we've got hard data being I have some use or consumption value. In this case, it was miles that we could convert into GHG emissions. What happens when we don't have that? So when you don't, the recommendation of the protocol is that you fall back to the kind of the last resort is to use your spending data to associate your spending and industry averages to determine what your scope 3 impact is. So you need cost data that's tracked at a level where it can be assigned to one of these available factors. And you can work with your finance and procurement teams to get that information. And that's exactly what we did. I'll tell you, that was a weird request. Our CFO, when I went and said, I'd like to get a GL breakdown of our 2022 spending so that I can do our GHG emission calculations. I think he thought that maybe I had been drinking or that something else had happened, or I had took the first part of the sentence and put it with a totally different second part of the sentence. There's a level of education that many organizations are going to go through as part of this journey to tracking GHG emissions, especially scope 3. But if you have that information, you can break it down into particular categories that can be mapped. It actually becomes a lot easier. And for us, it became a lot easier than what we thought it would be, at least as a first step. So the second part of that is the cost is the one bit. Then you need a reliable source for this cost-based conversion that we're talking about. And there are industry sources that are available. It will take, so I'll just tell you, if you go do this on your own, it's going to take some work to try to track this information down. That's where we can help. Factors are available. We have them already loaded in the the CarbonHub database, and we're continuing to add more of these factors to the CarbonHub data set from the EPA for the US, from DEFRA, which is from the UK, and also from EcoInvent, which represents global emissions and has factors from around the world. So that way you don't have to spend your time searching for that. You can spend your time on the things that are only unique to your organization. So then you might also be asking, well, how often do those numbers change? Well, it does vary, but a lot of them do have an annual cycle similar to how electricity changes on an annual basis. And that's another thing that we're taking care of for our customers is making sure that those factors stay consistent over time. So the exercise we went through, we took the GL's information provided by finance, and we had to pick, okay, well, what is the industry model that makes the most sense? And you can see here on the left in the bold, those were our GL codes. On the right is what we mapped those to. So these are some of the factors that are available in CarbonHub. So we mapped each one of those. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in CarbonHub. And you can look at this yourself if you'd like. So if we come up to this corporate activities node, you'll notice that we've got business travel. We also have purchase goods and services. So I'm going to spend most of my time here on purchase goods and services, but we ended up using the approach for both because we didn't have good tracking of how many miles were flown or anything like that. So we could use cost-based analysis in that case as well. But let's take something like printing expenses, right? So this is something that is not something you would normally have in EnergyCAP as an example, but it's actually pretty easy to get that information from finance. It's a category. So for us, we were able to get that information. We were able to pull it out, record it, and say, well, we spent this much on printing expenses during a given year. Now, where do we get our factor from? If we come over to our CarbonHub tab, I mentioned this is purchase goods and services. What is this GHG factor? What is that thing? Well, let's take a look at it. So again, we mapped to the right scope category, but then when it came to cost, you'll notice here, there are lots of factors that we have preloaded from information that we've gathered and we've compiled for you to use. And the nice thing is you can search this data. This is not, you don't have to just scroll through it. So you can actually search for something like, let's say, lawn care, right? So you can actually search for that and, oh, okay, well, these are the categories the CarbonHub has in it. Yeah, that's the one that applies for me. So lots of different category types that are being provided, and these are not only for the United States either. You can see here are factors that are from the United Kingdom. I mentioned the DEFRA factors, I mentioned the eco-invent factors. So depending on where you are in the world, we have factors that can be used and applied for you as well. It actually then becomes a fairly straightforward process. The difficulty is getting these factors, right, and getting the right ones. But they're sitting there in CarbonHub. So if you know what your spend is for a particular period of time, the conversion to scope 3 is actually pretty straightforward. And similar to what Lalit mentioned earlier, when you start tracking scope 3, you may find that it starts to eclipse some of the scope 1 and scope 2 activities of your organizations, depending on who you are. If we head up here to EnergyCAP and we now look at the combined activities in our particular offices as well as our spending, you'll notice that scope 3 has become our largest emission source. And specifically, we're able to look at that information and break it down and be able to see which particular categories are leading to that. And it's purchased goods and services, right? That's the number one for us. And it kind of makes sense if you step back and you think about our impact. But that's going to be different for different organizations. But the process was fairly straightforward. We got the data from finance. We mapped it to one of the factors that was available in CarbonHub. CarbonHub took care of the rest. Scope 3 emissions are now here, and they're now included in our roll-ups here. They're included in our reporting that's available through our dashboards, and they're available in our reports as well. So that's the process to take cost-based data and pretty easily, once the factors are there for you, which we've taken care of, pretty easily convert that into scope 3 emissions data that then you can start to report on a regular basis. Lalit, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay. Know that you're not alone. The GHG protocol does provide information for different organization types and makes recommendations about things that you should have that are more hard data, like I talked about, versus softer data, which might be financial based or cost based data. We provided a link here as well for that. The takeaway is this doesn't have to be as daunting as it seems at first. And I think, Lalit, you would be the first to admit this as well. When we sat down and said, we're going to embark on this journey for EnergyCAP's data, we were thinking that it was going to be a lot more involved than it was. Now, it could have been if we decided that we really needed to track all the way down to the individual reams of paper that we bought. That's not a core part of our business. Therefore, we did not track to that level, and we used cost instead. As we move forward and as we understand where more and more of our emissions are coming from, we may get to that level of granularity, but we don't have to today. We're working towards that, and this does not have to be something that you have to wait several years to feel like you've got a handle on. You can start today. So I know that we have only about 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to describe some of the CarbonHub reports. I'm going to show one. I might be able to show two of them very quickly for you. I do want you to note that as part of the CarbonHub release, for CarbonHub subscribers, we have updated 3 of the existing reports that are within EnergyCAP, and we've added 3 specifically dedicated greenhouse gas emission reports to provide your data in several different formats. And in discussions we've had with CarbonHub customers, these formats have been really well received. In particular, report 46, one of the questions that we often get is, well, are there any particular greenhouse gas protocols or standards that you automatically report to? And the answer is not yet. And part of that is very deliberate from our perspective, because some of those standards are still in flux. We talked about some of them today from a regulatory perspective. So what we've done is we've really tried to make CarbonHub data available to you in a very easy to digest manner. And then you can take that information and put it into a particular format or website that you need to. We want to make sure we're giving you the accurate information that you can trace to, and then you can take it the next step. Now, as part of future phases of CarbonHub, we are planning to have more and more integrations and more reports that may be pre-built for particular standards agencies. But we wanted to hold off and let the dust settle a little bit before we got there, but still provide you with the tools that allow you to perform well within your roles and within your teams. So where are these reports? They're integrated within regular EnergyCAP reports. And again, you all have access to this through the invitation that we provided through Catalyst, so you can take a look at this yourself. I'm just going to filter to greenhouse gas as a topic, and you can see those reports that I mentioned are all here. I'm going to start with this Swiss Army knife report that I mentioned, report 46. So why in the world do I call it the Swiss Army knife report? Well, let me go ahead and download this. You'll notice that this is an Excel-only download. And the reason for this is, again, we wanted to make sure your data was not trapped. We wanted your data to be easily accessible by you and your team so that you could take it and provide it into maybe a financial report that's required or some type of standard submission. So here you can see what we've done is, and I filtered to a particular part of our tree, a meter by meter view. I have commodity information. I've got information about the building that each of these meters are on. And for a particular reporting year, I have a month by month value of CO2e for every single meter. This makes it really, really easy to be able to take this information and summarize it or provide it to someone else. The totals for the entire month are included at the top of the screen. The totals for an entire meter for the entire year are over here on the right-hand side. This is one view. This report can also be run at a building level. It can also be run at an organization level, providing the information in a really easy to extract format. We also have several other reports. I'll let you look at those on your own. In particular, I would draw your attention to report 44, which provides a really great visual view of your emissions data, including the source gases that contributed to each of those, and a breakdown by scope category. It gives you a really great trend over years and shows how you're doing compared with historic figures. Other details that we wanted to make sure we put in your hands about CarbonHub. You may be asking, how's the GHG functionality in CarbonHub different from EnergyCAP? Well, CarbonHub unlocks all of the GHG scopes and categories, including scope 3 and all the categories associated with it. You have access to this broad set of maintained factors that's continuing to grow, including scope 3 factors. All of the advanced charts that I've been showing you, there are also dashboard widgets that are only available to CarbonHub subscribers, as well as these new reports that I just pointed to. You might also be saying, well, how is CarbonHub licensed? Because I'm familiar with EnergyCAP's meter-based model. CarbonHub is licensed based on the number of employees within your organization. And the reason for that, that's really deliberate. We didn't want you to limit yourself in terms of how granular you wanted to go with GHG emission tracking. So instead of saying that you only have a capped number of meters and you got to pay for more if you want to do more, with CarbonHub, it's very different. We said based on the size of your organization, that's how we're going to license it, but you have an unlimited number of data points that you can track, so you can get as fine-grained and as detailed into GHG reporting as you would like. Where are we going next? I showed this at Catalyst. Later this summer, we're going to have CarbonHub as an independent application with easier ways to get the data in, new reporting options, new ways to group your data together, including a new sustainability hierarchy. You'll be able to organize data in a different way from the facility teams and from the financial teams. You'll be able to create emission sources, like creating commodities on the fly, additional reporting and tracking, and other options that are coming as part of that. So we're just really at the beginning of all of the things that CarbonHub has available and will have available as we continue to move forward. Don't let that limit you. Like I said, you can do scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 tracking today with a combination of how CarbonHub is attached to EnergyCAP. And we didn't want you to miss, if you didn't catch it when we were at Catalyst, all of you who were Catalyst attendees, you all have the opportunity to purchase CarbonHub at a huge discount, a 70% discount by the end of June. And that was part of why we wanted to give you this opportunity to hear a little bit more about it. see it in action. Hopefully this has answered some questions for you along the way. If you want more details about that, please be in touch. You can reach out to sales@energycap.com or reach out to your account manager and they can provide you with details too. But this includes everything we've shown. Everything we've shown today, this is live, real data that's available. Feel free to log into the Catalyst database and see it for yourself. So we didn't expect that was going to take us the full 2 hours. There's a lot of content. I can stay on the line for a little bit and answer some questions live if you have additional ones we didn't get to in the chat. But thank you for your time today. We appreciate it. Lalit, any parting words for those who may be dropping off?
No, I just see that Bill Mitchell posted Necco Wafers link. So I'm
Oh,
guessing that he was in the
sorry,
audience
Bill.
when we.
No, Bill, I don't have any here with me today, and I got rid of my last candy necklaces, so my apologies for that. All right, I haven't been watching the chat. Lalit and others, are there questions there? And again, I'll stay on the line and answer some questions for folks, but if you need to drop off, thanks for your time today. We appreciate it. And be in touch if you do have any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can make it a little easier to see all of us.
Dave Bozeman has been doing a great job answering questions as they've been popping up.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, I will say, if you are on the line and you have any questions that haven't been answered, we'll give you another minute to submit them. If we don't get any, that's fine, and we'll wrap things up.
It's not a bad sign if you don't get questions. It means you did a good job covering everything.
True.
I just don't always believe it. That's the part, you know. It could also mean we put everyone to sleep, and hopefully that's not the case. I mean, I don't know how you could sleep with Lalit's shirt in the picture today. I mean, really. It's great because when we present like this, he can't reach over and punch me in the arm or anything like that. So it's really helpful.
I keep a log.
That wouldn't surprise me. I hope it's a binder you can keep adding pages to. Michael May, does CarbonHub work with version 7? So, Michael, if your question is with the legacy environment, the answer is no. This is part of the latest version of EnergyCAP. It's available to all of our customers who are in I'll call our main production environment. We know that there are a handful of folks who are still in the legacy environment and are moving out over the next year. CarbonHub is not available to those customers until they move into the primary production environment. But for the 99% of our customers who are in that full production environment, they have access to it today. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So from my perspective, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time and attention today. And despite what I said about him, I really do enjoy having the opportunity to collaborate with Lalit on things like this. I always learn something new from him, and I hope you all did too.
Have a good rest of your day and enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a great one.
Take care, everybody.